Indeed, just to explain my visit, there was no specific event or reason for that. I just wanted to take the opportunity of coming here and liaising with different interlocutors, meeting some of our partners, visiting some of the projects that we fund, visiting the government authorities, the city of Bulawayo, interacting with NGOs, indeed having 2 visits to our agricultural projects here in the surroundings, and to get to learn more about the specifics of Bulawayo and indeed of Matabeleland. So there was no specific reason or event that brought me here, but it was kind of a study visit. But also the opportunity then to liaise and discuss and observe, and it has been quite rewarding. 2 days now, feels like longer because they have been packed with program. But this, we also wanted to have just this opportunity to liaise with the media, because I'm very often in contact with your colleagues in Harare, but I regret to say that I haven't been to Bulawayo very often, and I haven't taken this opportunity to engage with the media fraternity here in Bulawayo. So we wanted to take that opportunity, that indeed, and we are open for any questions that you might have about this visit, or indeed about EU in general. So that's why we are here for, and without wasting more of your time, I will be very happy to respond to anything that you might have on your minds. Thank you very much. Maybe if you can, when you ask questions, maybe you can introduce yourself so that we get to know you.
My name is Lee McKenna. I'm from Next Level Media. I just want to know how much the gap between the new regime in Harare and the EU in terms of maybe healing relations.
Right. You were mentioning about a gap in our relations. I've been often, asked to explain with a couple of words what the Zimbabwe-EU relations are about, and I refuse to do it in a number of 1 or 2 words. Clearly, we have had a troubled past, the past 20 years or so, and there are issues where we have disagreements. Notably, these issues about human rights, as you have noticed, we have commented about those in the public also when we have had concerns coming up, and we have then issues such as the EU restrictive measures, where we hear all kinds of stories that we don't agree to be reflecting the accurate state of affairs and the truth. Then we have issues about democratization and our hopes of the reforms going forward. I have to say we have a good relation in terms of discussing these matters. We have frank and open discussions. Also, now since last year, also in a structured format where we have this political dialogue. We had 2 sessions, now one in June and one now in November. And I have to say that we were quite good experience in a sense that we could discuss all these items. We didn't agree on everything, not at all. And there are issues of concern for the EU in Zimbabwe, clearly also going forward. But the political side of our relations is one part. Then there's also the development cooperation part, which is where we have been cooperating with the government, but not through the government, because our funding doesn't go through the government. And this is coming to an important point now, since the EU multi-annual financial framework is coming to an end in 2020. That means the multi-annual budget that we have had since 2014 to 2020 is coming to an end. And now in Brussels they are negotiating the new budget for everything the EU needs funding for. Development cooperation will be part of that. And what we need to do in 2020 is to negotiate, not negotiate, but consult also with Zimbabwe, not only the government, but other stakeholders as well, how our development cooperation will look from now on. If you want me to go into more into detail that, I'll be happy to do that. And then linked to development aid is humanitarian aid, which is becoming more and more, unfortunately again, quite a prominent issue for the EU in Zimbabwe, as we see quite alarming news about how the humanitarian situation is evolving. And just last week we announced an $18.7 million more in terms of humanitarian aid. So we want to be there to support the population of Zimbabwe in these difficult times. Then there's the trade angle, and we have the free trade agreement with Zimbabwe, the economic partnership agreement. Zimbabwe, together with Seychelles, Mauritius, Madagascar, and the Comoros, are part of the Eastern and Southern African Economic Partnership Agreement with EU, which forms the which grants Zimbabwe also duty-free and quota-free access for Zimbabwean produce to enter the European market. And we just spent this afternoon discussing with the business community on what opportunities this might raise, and we would like to see those trade relations expanding. That's clear. Right now they are also negotiating about expanding the agreement to cover areas such as services. And I've understood that they have successful rounds of negotiations recently. These 5 Eastern and Southern African countries and EU, and we are hopeful that we will have more traction on that. So, to make a long story short, there's many different aspects to our relations, and there are certainly issues where we could converge more and find more common ground, but it's difficult to put all of that in a nutshell.
Okay, I'll ask. My name is Ngobile Chile from the Chronicle. Yesterday you engaged with the local authority, Bulawayo City Council. I just want to find out, what is the partnership that you are having with the Bulawayo City Council, and are you happy with your engagements with the local authority? Secondly, you're highlighting that your funding in Zimbabwe is ending this year for the program that you've been funding. Are you happy with the way the funds have been utilized by your developmental partners?
Right, thank you. First, with the city of Bulawayo and our partnership. We are supporting the devolution exercise in Zimbabwe through our support. We have a program that supports the devolution through capacity building for local authorities. So this is also happening in Bulawayo, and with the idea of trying to train the local authorities of being more, be able to take more responsibility. And so this is something that we are doing not only in Bulawayo, but with other local authorities also in Zimbabwe. But this is apart from that, we don't have a direct relation. We have implementing partners that are putting in place that program. But apart from that, my visit was also to link up with the local authorities and hear their views about the situation in the city and the province, and how their view their major challenges. And we had a good exchange about that, and partly it was mostly linked to the business opportunities and try to how to recreate the industry in Bulawayo and get that going. It was quite an interesting discussion, which we then continue with other interlocutors today. Then your second question about the projects. Many of these projects will continue running even after 2020 because the funding is already there, the commitments have been made. And but what is happening now is the design phase of what's coming next. And that's an important exercise to plan for the future years. So we can't make any new commitments for any new projects because the funding is not available anymore. The projects that are running are running until their logical conclusion, but nothing new is on the pipeline before there's an agreement on the budget and indeed all the nuts and bolts that need to be placed for the future funding. Pleased with the projects or not? That's a very wide question because we have plenty of development interventions, a lot of them in Zimbabwe. Our three priority sectors here are health, agriculture, and governance, where we are working with a variety and through a variety of interlocutors, the UN family, the NGOs, they are implementing partners in these projects, World Bank partly, and we are also providing capacity building to the public sector. We are cooperating with the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Finance, again, not through them, but with them. Again, I can't answer that question. It depends on, you have to go program specific and address those things. Today I was visiting a project we are supporting, a program that we are supporting together with UK and Sweden called the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund, implemented by the UNDP and then some international local NGOs. And from that program, at least, I see it's very pertinent. It's addressing about climate change resilience, and I've heard good stories about those communities that we have been supporting have been able to respond to the current crisis better than some other communities that are experiencing a lot of issues, with the drought and other problems. That's a good example of something that's clearly seems to be working well. Then there are others that there's probably more to be wished for, and where we are not maybe getting going forward as fast as we would like. One project, for example, that we are supporting is the constitutional alignment of bringing laws in aligned to the constitution, and we have for a long time not seen so much traction on that side. But now it has picked up more recently, but there's still plenty of work to be done on that side. So there's issues, and this links to the reform agenda and how quickly that is moving. And there's different kind of stories there. We want to get up that more holistic view that you were also asking for. What is our overall judgment on the projects that have been put in place, and we have, like we're, starting with an evaluation of looking of all our activities from 2014 onwards until now, to see what lessons we should draw from our cooperation when we plan for our future engagement. So that is currently, in fact, taking place.
Thank you. It's Thomas Stolle from Zimbabwe Center for Media and Information Literacy. As EU, what is your take with regards the dialogue process that is currently underway, and specifically Pollard? Thank you.
Right. The dialogue process, are you referring to the dialogue between the government and the opposition? And, well, to start with, we clearly see that there's need for national dialogue. There's clear Zimbabwe is experiencing a lot of issues on the economic front, on the related also to the social sector. We have quite concerning stories about how the economic crisis is having a negative influence on the social fabric in many places. And we have the humanitarian crisis. So in order to address this, of course, all of these have a political dimension. And the fact that there's a very polarized situation politically is probably not very helpful in addressing all of these issues either. So we have been also in favor of having dialogue going on and to have it to be comprehensive. But exactly how and how that we would not be prescriptive. We would not tell to the Zimbabwean, not to the government, not to the wider Zimbabwean societies exactly how they should be doing that. But we would be very much hoping that it would be comprehensive, so that everybody would be be taken on board, and that it would be addressing some of the key questions that are are of concern for the Zimbabweans as it is now. Which format they exactly should be taking. I would refrain from commenting because that would be too prescriptive from our side. But we hope that it will take place.
Okay, my name is Michael Dita. I'm a Zimbabwe Independent. You did mention that there have been points of difference with the government in your dialogue. So if you can be specific, what have been the sticking points with regards to that? And clearly, you have your priorities as a body with regards to what you would want to see happen. So apart from the fact that you don't want to be prescriptive, you do have areas that you think these are the ones that will determine whether you move forward with Zimbabwe in terms of support for the economic trajectory going forward.
Right. There's nothing to hide there in what issues are where we have differences of point of view, and one is clearly that where we have come out of also publicly is also in the human rights violations that have been taking place in the country. Last year was not a very good year from that perspective, and I think that has been recognized by many other international observers and human rights groups, and indeed the special rapporteurs for human rights that came here, both on the freedom of assembly and also on the right to food. So that we share many of those observations that have been made by them as well. So these are very important issues, and they relate about how especially how the security forces have been acting and responding to some of these events that have been taking place. So that's clearly one of the issues that have been on our agenda, have been on the table for our to discuss, and where we have expressed our concerns. So that's one obvious point where to start. Linked to this, we've very much been encouraging the government to follow up on the Motlanthe Commission recommendations, because they would be very pertinent to the subsequent events that have been happening in the country, and we would have hoped for follow up on those recommendations. So we are still waiting for the government to respond to those, and also to the Electoral Observation Mission recommendations. I think that's kind of a low-hanging fruit. The recommendations are there. We hear noises that from the government side that there's many of these recommendations are not really contested. It's really how to address those. But it's been now more than a year since the Motlanthe Commission report came out. That is much longer than a year since the electoral observation missions, not only the EU one, but other ones as well, which largely correspond, I think, to the EU observations. And we have been, hoping that there would be follow up on those items, and are still hoping. But the clock is ticking, of course, towards the next elections, and many of these recommendations, at least from what we have, from the EU side that has been put on the table, would also require time, also to be addressed. So all in all, this political reform agenda is part of that. Where we have had differences of view, at least from the timetable side. It's like, how fast is it going forward? from the government side, we have had, these complaints about the EU restrictive measures. We have been time and again been explaining, that they indeed are very marginal, that the accusation that they would be the cause of any of the economic problems in Zimbabwe is something that we clearly, cannot be in agreement with, and will not be in agreement with. So that's one of the issues that have been clearly discussed. So I think those are perhaps the most topical ones, and of course there are other issues that we have been discussing, which we clearly see that of course it's for the Zimbabweans to solve these issues, but I think the economic crisis is something that that from our point of view also requires attention to structural issues about how to get the agriculture going. What are the bottlenecks? Why are there no investments coming? What is the situation with security of tenure? Where there's, like they said, there's different ways to skin a cat, and you can't prescribe that you have to do this A, B, C, and D. That's for the Zimbabweans to decide. But clearly the current humanitarian crisis also tells that there's a problem with agricultural production. The production figures tell that. So there's a variety of issues that I think we just need to keep on this discussion going, and try to and we need to continue the discussion. And if there's a resurgence of some of these human rights issues, and so we will not be shy away of coming back to those and comment and taking up our concerns.
Thank you very much. Khululi Ncube with Star FM. Maybe my first question will be, what effect will Brexit have on the relationship between EU and Zimbabwe, if any? And then what's the position of the EU in the process done by the government to amend the constitution? Maybe my last one, I think this one maybe will be on a lighter note. What opportunities are there for professional Zimbabweans in the European EU countries? Of late, there seems to be an increase of Zimbabweans flocking into some of these countries. What's driving this from the EU countries' side? Thank you.
Right, thank you. Can you repeat the first question? Was
the Brexit effect?
The Brexit effect. Okay, yes. I don't foresee any major changes coming out of the Brexit. Of course, that's not for me to decide, or not for the whole process going on in Europe, and Britain is leaving, and I can't foresee that to be a major game changer in any way of EU-Zimbabwe relations. I think the UK will remain a very important partner, obviously, for the EU. So they are not going to vanish from the face of the earth from our perspective, but basically we will obviously continue to very closely cooperate with the UK. That's a given. But I can't foresee, and I don't predict, or I can't foresee any major changes as regards the remaining EU member states and the EU institutions from that. It will have an influence, obviously, when we're talking about budget, overall budget for the EU and the corresponding development cooperation budget. Obviously, that the UK won't be there as a contributor. Apart from that, I would not be able to speculate. On the constitutional amendments, again, this is very much an issue for the Zimbabweans, and I've seen that criticism, that why are these proposals put in place? I would not be able to comment on that. Of course, there's measures of how, if Zimbabweans want to change the constitution, it's possible. I have noticed very much the criticism from certain quarters about, why is it being done. The question that would come into mind is that why would this be a priority now? Because there's a lot of other issues on the legislative agenda that needs attention. I was referring to the electoral reforms, for example, and then the quite a heavy agenda that His Excellency the President also presented as the legislative agenda for the Parliament in the State of the Nation speech. So this seems now to be the priority in comparison to other issues that would be coming for the work for the Parliament. The Zimbabweans flocking to Europe, European countries. I'm not quite sure exactly what you're referring to. I'm not privy to that information. Maybe that's because the EU delegation is not in charge of consular affairs. So I'm not sure about what is happening exactly on the immigration front. But I don't know if you want to enlighten me further on that perspective.
Thank you. My name is Mantla Chuma and I'm with SITE. I have got two questions. The first one is to do with Zimbabwe's isolation in the international community. Just as we speak right now, some African leaders are meeting in UK there in an investment conference, but our president is not there. So my question is, what does Zimbabwe need to do for her to be accepted internationally? Because we are seeing that all these engagements that we're being told that they have improved this and that relations, but we see Zimbabwe still continues to be isolated internationally. And then the second question is to do with the economy. You have been meeting with business people, or you have seen what is happening in the country. With what you have seen, would you say there is any hope for the Zimbabwean economy? Thank you.
Right, thank you. On the UK Africa Investment Summit, I really can't comment. That's not. I'm not privy of what is happening there. I've been following the news like you also have. So I that's really all I can say about say on that matter. Isolation, international relations are not on off. It's not a switch of the button that you're in either. You're isolated or you're fully engaged. There's shades of all kinds of grey between black and white, and it depends on a variety of issues. I think in international relations, I think what is really exaggerated these days is these government-to-government contacts, when it's much I think, at least in the European context, the international relations are starting to be more and more about various layers of society engaging with each other. And from that perspective, I know that there's not very much interaction between Zimbabwe and the European EU countries these days, in terms of investment or trade. Our trade is only 5%. Trade with EU is only around 5% of Zimbabwe's trade. So I think you can't, again, not to be too simplistic about it. But I understand what you're driving at, and that's like the government-to-government relations. And look, I say from the EU perspective, we had we just had last week a visit by our head of unit from the humanitarian office here for Eastern and Southern Africa, which was quite important from a humanitarian point of view. We haven't had political level engagement last year, but we did have two very highly ranked senior officials who came into the country in May and June. So it's like things are happening also from an EU perspective, but indeed in terms of this highest level interaction, that depends on what our political masters have on their calendar and agenda, and what are the opportunities there to have those interactions. And that depends on a variety of issues. Isolation is not the word that I would use, but it is when there are like more opportunities, to promote certain parts of mutual agenda, of course, that adds to the interest of interacting at the highest level as well. Sorry? Hope for the economy. Yes, like we knew last year the economy contracted. I think that's that's something that's recognized by all parties, and 2019 was not a very good year for Zimbabwe from many perspectives. I think the basis for a rebound of the Zimbabwean economy really is there. It's I spent a big chunk of my career in Africa, and it's like when I see the potential of the human resource that Zimbabwe has with this skilled and well-educated population, when you think about all the raw materials that you have in the country, when you think about still the infrastructure, although it's facing challenges that it has there, the agricultural potential that is clearly there, and it's like you imagine just the surroundings of Bulawayo. It's like you have all this agricultural potential in terms of cattle. You have gold, you have coal, you have all these tourism opportunities around. So I think the ingredients for a turnaround clearly are there. And I think there's also a factor in the global economy that would play in favor of Zimbabwe, which is that investors are looking for profit. The interest rates in the eurozone are negative. If you put your money in the bank, you are not getting more. It's like minus what you're getting out of your banks, and it's the same thing in the global economy at large. That there's capital out there that is looking for profit, but it's looking at a profit with tolerable risks. And I think at the moment, from what I've heard, the appetite for investments for Zimbabwe are not there. So what one would hope for, to have that investment climate, that would get the funding also coming in. And I'm talking about foreign investment because I know more about that. I don't know so much about domestic investment, but I think it there's the policy mix to get the economy going, and the structural reforms would be necessary. But otherwise, I do recognize that with the humanitarian situation, like that 2020 has started in difficult circumstances. But let's hope it will get better. Maybe the new ones first. Yeah.
I'm Daisy Jeremani. I'm a freelance reporter. And my question is, it's almost 9 months after the launch of the Zimbabwe Agriculture Program, which the EU is sponsoring at the tune of 45 million. So I wanted to find out, have you managed to go out to visit the beneficiaries of the fund, and are you happy if the fund is being used properly to what it has been meant to do? I'm actually interested in the pig, the poultry side, the pork side of the program. I know it has been, there is the goat, there is the cattle and stuff, but I'm just interested in the pig.
I'm going tomorrow. So ask me tomorrow evening. I'm going to... David is going to help me out in a minute. Where am I going again? So I'm going for a project visit tomorrow on the Zimbabwe Agricultural Growth Program, and Balu Pekan. So it's around 40 minutes away from town, I've heard. So we are going there tomorrow, in fact, to do a project visit. Overall, I would not be able to respond to your questions about how the project has been performing, because we launched the project now in June, I think, at Chibero College, close to, not far from Harare. So I can't say how it has been how it has performed and if it has yielded results yet. I think it's too early to tell. But I can say that, you know, being a farmer's son myself, I'm a dairy farmer's son. I was quite happy about the project concept and how it's looking at, you know, this value chain creation and how it's looking at livestock, and you know, trying to change that mindset of, you know, really, you know, in a good sense of making it commercial. You know, the agricultural entrepreneurship. So I'm quite keen. I'm looking forward for tomorrow, and then I hopefully will know more after that.
Okay, I'm Sean from SITE. When it comes to transparency, are you in talks with the Zimbabwean government in the forms of open data, in the sense that it's very hard for like citizens to find out what mega deals they've signed, what's detailed in these contracts, or where the money is spent? Since you're talking about governance issues, are you talking about the government opening up their data so that people can access their data, if you know, or if you're in such talks?
When we are talking about transparency, you know, it leads me to think about corruption, and that's, you know, one of the issues that we definitely are also talking with the government about. And in fact, we are supporting also the efforts on corruption, you know, through the anti-corruption campaign with ZAC and the National Prosecutor's Office. But transparency of information, and so it is, you know, it is on our minds when we are talking about the reform of the media bills. That's part of the discussion that we have had around those issues, and that's again one of the reforms that we hope that will be, you know, that we would see progress on, access to information. But as such, we don't have specific issues, as far as my memory serves me right, where we would have said that, you know, this kind of information should be public. One thing that comes into my mind, I think that the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, who is one of our partners, is doing a tremendous job on the issue of mining governance and these kind of issues, and they have, you know, done a great job in trying to get you know, getting the information about, you know, the mining deals and their contractual arrangements, and indeed engage the parliament also in that. But I don't know if you have any specific area of information access in mind, or just in general. Yeah. And but indeed, one further topic perhaps which is linked to this is that in addition to Zella, we have been very much suggesting to the government also in the terms of our latest political dialogue round, you know, to consider favorably the extractive industries transparency initiative. That's one thing that comes into my mind. And then also in terms of financial flows and issues that are surrounding that, you know that Zimbabwe was grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force recently about the policies and practices as regards finances, and that's an area that we have also discussed, and also an area where we would be, you know, be ready to lend support also to address some of these issues regarding transparency of financial transactions and so. But on data protection issues, very topical issues in EU, and you know, and access to data, but not as an overall topic, perhaps.
My name is Kutsanaim Sengi. I'm a stringer for the Voice of America. There have been concerns by USAID. It's related to corruption over, you know, humanitarian aid that it's sometimes stolen or used as a political tool. As the EU, you obviously also, you know, finance humanitarian aid. What's your take on that? Have you discussed this with the government? Thank you.
Indeed, we have. Our take is very clear. It's like we, you know, like we won't accept any politicization of humanitarian aid, and this is a point that we have put across to the government latest last week when we had this humanitarian mission in town, and we met with government representatives, and we passed this message, and also in political dialogue in November, that was a clear message that we passed. That is very important for us, and not only because we are using taxpayers' money, but it's also would be against the principles of humanitarian aid, which is that you need to target the most needy, and it has to be impartial. And that's clear. So we have been putting these points across. I've been reading in the news about these claims about politicized aid, and if I've understood correctly, they relate mostly on the issues about the government relief, which we think it would be very problematic. Of course, if the idea is for that is also to go to the most needy ones. But for us, we are monitoring through our partners as well the use of EU humanitarian support, and it's really really crucial for us that it does not get politicized and it's used in an impartial way.
I have to go back to my question. Since you cannot give us an overview of what is happening in the program, what necessitated the launch of the fund?
The launch was necessitated, well, necessitated is perhaps the wrong word, but like I said, agriculture is one of our priority areas. There's approximately 80 million euros targeted to agriculture from that overall EU development cooperation portfolio for Zimbabwe. And so it's been a process, after lengthy deliberations about what kind of support should we give to Zimbabwean agriculture to make it vibrant. And there are then the two main interventions or two main programs that came out from that. One was the Resilience Building Fund, which is targeted, in order for the communities to address climate change factors and have more the kind of engage into a kind of agriculture that would make them able to thrive even in difficult and changing circumstances. The AGP, the Agricultural Growth Program, then is a different kind of, and it's on purpose addressed in a different way of trying to address more the commercial side of agriculture in order to help in changing the agriculture into a more vibrant sector and to contribute more to the economy. And that's then addressed not at the communities level, but more at the private entrepreneur level, and then small to medium-sized agricultural entrepreneur level. And it's a conscious decision of trying to get these value chains working, and from that point of view, then also create more livelihoods, job opportunities, and economic growth. That's the logic behind that intervention. So. Necessitated. It's always, it's always resources are finite, so you always have to take, what you think would have the best influence on the overall situation, and the project concept was then deemed to be one of those. In addition to that, it was also something that, in terms of how we run our funds, we always need to consult very closely the government and have their approval what we are doing under these main headings. And so this is something that was identified. Then that's something that we should be doing.
The issues that keep cropping up when I do story after story on Zimbabwe's economic situation is the issue of macroeconomic policy volatility. And you did say, you are aware of what European investors are very much interested in with regards to investing in Zimbabwe. Is macroeconomic policy volatility one of the sticking points from the side of European investors? Tied to that, maybe you might wish to speak to the recent Supreme Court judgment, which effectively is going to impact businesses that were owed a lot of money, even by government, and they're going to definitely, because of the policy change from US to RTGS. So if you may maybe speak to that, if you have any opinion or position with regards to that.
I really can't spell out any opinion on that. I know that I've already saw a lot of that criticism. That is that it's creating a lot of issues, and I'm not quite sure what the implications for the financing and banking sector would be. That's clearly something that that one would need to analyze and study. So I don't I would not be able to comment on the decision as a whole. And what implications it might have, but clearly it's a very important ruling, and yeah, that's what I can say about that. Macroeconomic volatility and its and policies and their impact on European investors. Yes. They do have an impact. I think the impacts relate to one thing that is very important for an investor, obviously, is predictability. That when you put your money into stake, then you need to have assumptions about what will happen to that funding in the future, and then you would and the reason why you put your money is that you want to get profit out of that. I know that there has been concern by European would-be investors and existing actors, in fact, in Zimbabwe, who are engaged in different industries here, is about, for example, about the repatriation of profits. That was an issue already before, the most recent volatility about the access, to forex and the return of profits from Zimbabwe, and that's clearly if you have insecurities about that, then it influences your appetite. I think that goes almost without saying. So I think the issues revolving around currency and the movement of funding and so they do have an influence on investor perception. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Bongani Ndlovu. I work at the Chronicle. I want to find out about funding in terms of the arts industry in Zimbabwe. If there's, when you talk about that you're going to stop the funding in 2020, how is that going to affect the arts and culture industry in Zimbabwe? And are there any opportunities for artists or arts practitioners for skills development and capacity building through the EU that you can highlight? Thank you.
The funding will not stop. The funding will continue. Our programs will still run, but it's so it's kind of that the budget allocation that we have will run end in 2020, and we can't enter into new commitments. We can't start new programs, but the old ones will still run and through their course even after 2020. So just wants to repeat that. So it's not any political decision that now it ends and that's and goodbye and that's it. No, it's just that we are entering into a new phase, and which we would need to then consult how we go about it. Culture. Culture is not one of the priority sectors that we have. Also, of course, culture is not such a big ticket item. In comparison to the social sectors or agriculture, for example. I think the EU as an institution doesn't have huge funding for culture. There's certain activities that we have supported, certain organizations with very limited funding from our part. The European Film Festival That is an annual event both in Harare and Bulawayo. This year included programs where we engage with the local film industry and artists, in terms of training, in interactive sessions, of bringing about expertise from elsewhere in Africa, and we were quite happy with that. What we could do with very limited funding in that respect. We also have supported activities such as the Marimba Camp, which is run by an organization from Harare, but in different locations, and from kids from different locations. That's an annual thing that we have been also supporting, and some others, but it has not been huge. I have to confess. I think our member states are doing better on that front. They have exchange programs. They have support also to cultural institutions. You have also cultural institutions from our member states, such as Alliance Française, for example, that are doing their own cooperation. So I think member states are faring quite well on that field, and we do hope that it will continue. The role of culture in our future cooperation will be, should be one of these issues that we should discuss when we are discussing about our future engagement, come the new financial framework.
In any democracy, media play a very critical role. Would you say maybe going forward, media would be, especially media development, would be one of the priorities, especially looking at growing democracies like Zimbabwe? And are there available opportunities for media practitioners in terms of scholarship programs, fellowships? Thank you.
Thank you. I do agree that media plays an extremely important role in democracies, and a vibrant media community is important. The watchdog function, providing information, etc. And there's a number of organizations that are doing a very good job in Zimbabwe also in promoting freedom of speech and related items. Again, this is an issue to be discussed, for the future cooperation. I really can't say exactly where everything would land, but that's certainly, I take note of that, and as a point that would be made. In terms of scholarships, some of our member states, both an exiting member state, but also existing member states, have scholarship programs with Zimbabwe. And indeed, EU as a whole also has scholarship programs, the Erasmus Plus. I don't know if you've heard about it, but we were quite happy about having that expanded, and the number of Zimbabwean participants in that Erasmus program has not been huge, especially in comparison to some of other scholarship programs. But the new Commission has an ambition of expanding that. So we are very much hoping, from our perspective, that there will be more scholarship opportunities to come to Zimbabwe as well. And in terms of media, this by no means that would be excluded from that should be part of the sector. I think we had, my memory serves me right, in the last round, 2019, we had journalism students, at least one, in that program, in Erasmus Plus. I think going to, I think Germany, or was it Austria? Not quite sure, but yeah.
My name is Anastasia Ndlovu. I'm with Studio 7, Voice of America. I would like to find out from you what is your office doing regards the constitutional amendments that are taking place. In Zimbabwe, started working or preparing for 2023 elections. Are you funding the demarcation process and other processes in the electoral reform? And what is it that you feel must be looked at first in the amendment of the Constitution, aligning it to the Constitution that they are already amending?
I think I commented on the constitutional amendment bill, and I think there's issues for Zimbabweans to discuss in the parliamentary process. I'm sure we'll take these issues up. I noticed that there's, for example, the issue about extending the quota of women in parliament, and I've seen that also some gender organizations have expressed opinions about that matter. So I I'm expecting quite a vibrant discussion about many of these topics that are there. On the constitutional alignment, again, there's not an exact pecking order for the EU to say, what should be done and what should not be done. Like I said, we have been supporting the constitutional alignment agenda through technical assistance to the Ministry of Justice. There was first a long delay after 2013 that not much was done in terms of coming up with secondary legislation. I think the technical work since has picked up quite significantly. And last year, I know that there was a lot of preparatory work, but I see that a lot of that is not yet reflected in legislation that would have been passed. I would not be saying what would be more important than others. There's still an agenda on the constitutional alignment that needs to clearly still needs attention. Delimitation of boundaries. Again, this is something that the EU observation mission took this up from a point of view that they had concerns that there should be enough time between the census and the elections in order for the voters' roll to reflect, what was taking place in the census. And I've understood that, that the plan is to take a different route and have continuous voter registration and delinking it from from the census, which kind of, if this is the route to be taken, that leaves that EU observation mission recommendation a bit redundant. We are providing also technical support to technical assistance to ZEC, and we are also supporting we have also a program supporting the Parliament. So we have had opportunities of discussing this, and I would not comment on that from any other perspectives, but from the one that obviously the demarcation of boundaries is a very political question, a very sensitive question, so that it needs to be tackled in a way by those that have power on the delimitation, that it would be carried out in a transparent manner, and that guarantees impartiality and doesn't need to show that any favoritism one way or the other, because of course that any of that would then create more problems to the pre-electoral environment. So I hope this will also be the course that will be taken.
My name is Lungelo Ndlovu. I'm a reporter with the Reuters. I needed to know, I'm interested in climate change. In terms of support, are you supporting transitioning efforts in Africa? And also, do you see opportunities maybe here in Zimbabwe as government is has come up with a renewable energy policy that really speaks to renewable energy issues? Are there opportunities that you are seeing for investment?
Thank you. From the climate change, the way we have been mainly addressing that in our recent cooperation has been, like I said, the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund, which is looking at the effects on climate change on agriculture and trying to respond to that. But that's more on the responses and not on mitigation efforts. And you pointed out quite rightly about the issues around energy and their relevance to climate change. And in the EU, this is a huge thing. If there would be one priority in the EU for the new Commission that they have been abundantly clear about, is the climate change. A couple of weeks back, they presented this Green Deal for the EU, where the Commission presented very ambitious proposals of having the EU's own goals for reducing emissions and tackling climate change, to really be the trailblazer globally on addressing climate change related issues. So that's something that is clear. And since it's such a big topic, an important topic, I would not be surprised if that would also be reflected in our external aid, also vis-à-vis then Zimbabwe. But that remains to be seen, and that depends on the consultations to be had also here in Zimbabwe. Renewable energy, like energy, has not been one of the partner sectors. The thinking in Europe on infrastructure investments, including energy, is that we don't use grant money. We shouldn't use grant money in massive amounts for that, because infrastructure investments should be viable, and often there should be, a return, and obviously energy should be something that should also make economic sense. And now I know that one of the bottlenecks, of course, not only in Zimbabwe but in several African countries, is that energy has been heavily subsidized, and that's why it has been difficult to get private operators into the energy business. And this is a conundrum. Now I know that it's available, and it requires tough political choices of which way to go, of providing cheap energy, and it's like not only for the population but because of the interest of business and industry. And for the competitiveness, but then again, from a sustainability point of view, how can you continue producing energy as a loss? So to put the renewable energy side into this context is that I think renewable energies should be the way to go, and the amount of sunshine that Zimbabwe gets is one of the top in the world. So the solar energy should be a no-brainer. I'm aware that there's some hindrances of how, for example, solar, of how much you can use that for industrial purposes, that would need a stable load all the time, 24/7. So it's not, maybe a panacea for everything, but clearly it should be a huge part of the answer, and not necessarily, like having, maybe partly perhaps having these like hundreds of megawatts of, having solar power stations, but at least, and this should be clear, for a small scale solutions, for households and small industry, where it could, clearly take off, the load from the larger scale grid-based energy solutions. In fact, I've read interesting articles about that, like the energy should go the way telephony has gone, from being, on telephone lines on the grid, that it should be, decentralized and having independent units that, operate independently. And I see that happening to an extent, but because of necessity, but perhaps that's, is one of the ways forward. But of course, it's not excluded to that renewable energy. Of course, hydro. I've understood there's a lot of dams in Zimbabwe, even with this current drought, that could, like, opportunities for mini hydro. I've seen good examples elsewhere in Africa about mini hydro. You put in good use in smaller towns and districts, and obviously, and then biofuel solutions, which then of course, one has to take, into account, the exact context and so. So I think it's a very interesting topic, an important topic, because energy is required not only for household use but also for economic growth. So I think that's I would also expect to be in these discussions for us, our forthcoming cooperation, but like I said, for large-scale industrial projects, it's usually the instrument of choice would be loans or different kind of guarantee instruments, and the EU has recently been developing many of these. We call the External Investment Plan, EIP. Zimbabwe is excluded from public loans because of the arrears question. Not because of sanctions or anything like that, but because of the arrears that Zimbabwe owes to the multilateral financial institutions and many of the EU member states also, and the European Investment Bank. But private loans, for example, from the EIB, or the loans from to the private sector from EIB are possible. There's nothing hindering that. And EIB comes here from time to time. We have discussions. One bottleneck that they have had has been the banking sector, and with all its problems, because EIB cannot lend directly, obviously, to David here. Take 100,000. They'd have to go through a bank and have local partners for that, and there has been issues around it, but they are not giving up. So they are coming to Zimbabwe from time to time, and I hope that there will be opportunities for EIB to be a lender for the private sector. And I would then say that the renewable energy could well be one of the areas where they could have interest because of this climate change. Interest that we have in the EU to be one of those areas where they could come in. So let's hope that will happen.
There were recent press reports that China turned down the Zimbabwe government's, application for some funding, and I think you were also quoted in our paper, saying the conditionalities for Zimbabwe to access maybe the public loans that you're talking about. So maybe if you can just elaborate on those conditions. I noticed that you did say there are various levels of engagement between the EU and Zimbabwe, like you're funding these non-governmental initiatives, funding these projects, but at that level of public loans, maybe if you can just kind of speak to what are the sticking points. And also maybe just on top of that, just address the issue of how much the EU has been giving to Zimbabwe, either directly or indirectly, through the funds that you allocate to various projects.
The issue on public loans, like I said, it's it's linked to the fact that Zimbabwe hasn't serviced its loans since the end of the 1990s. So it's defaulted on its loans. And it's defaulted on its loans not only to the public lending institutions of individual countries, many of them main lenders being some of the EU member states, but also to the international financing institutions, which are then the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the IMF, but also the European Investment Bank. So this happened already in the late 90s, from the late 90s onwards. And what this then means that that means that as long as Zimbabwe has not cleared the debt that it has to those institutions, then it means that those institutions will not be able to provide new loans. So I think that's the conditionality kind of what we have. It's not conditionality, but it's a rule of those IFIs, and it's not a rule for Zimbabwe. It's a rule that they have for any kind of an engagement. And if you think about it, it's logical because, ultimately you're using your taxpayers' money, or the public money from your taxpayers, and it's like if loans are not serviced, then the money disappears somewhere. So it needs to be accounted for and returned, or you need to find some kind of a settlement for that before then you can move onward and get a new batch of loans. And as far as my understanding goes, the first point of call are the international financing institutions, and then you start discussing with the bilateral lenders, the Paris Club and so forth. European Investment Bank is one of the creditors who are owed money, and that's why. Sorry. The figure for European Investment Bank, I probably would know. It's to the tune of around $200 million US. I'm not quite sure what is the accurate figure. Is it below or above that? It might be either way. And I'm not on top of the arrears on that. Please don't quote me on this because I should check. What is the exact number on those? If it was below or but that's the magnitude figure. That's the headline figures where we are. And the World Bank is the biggest portion of those areas. So that's it. That's the that's the root of or the issue around loans. The money that we are and for obvious reason, then that's grants that we are providing, and the national indicative program was a bit more than 230 million euro for 2014 to 2020. But then we topped up that figure with 53 million euro last October, and that money went to the health sector and to agriculture, and specifically this resilient portfolio. So that took it up to almost 300 million euro. But then outside of this national indicative program we have other budget lines that are supporting Zimbabwe. Last year we launched the Spotlight program against gender-based violence, which is more than $20 million, and that's a multi-annual program. And then we have other thematic budget lines. For example, we have a budget line supporting the implementation of the free trade agreement of the EPA. We have 10 million. We have support for Zimbabwe through regional organizations that we are supporting through COMESA and SADC. In fact, the leather project that we visited in Bulawayo today was part of EU support through COMESA to Zimbabwe. And then we have other thematic budget lines in topics through support to NGOs, through health, through global budget lines. So the figure about how much we give to Zimbabwe depends, and you have to assemble all these various support figures, and it roughly comes to around, and this is the best guess, but it varies from year to year, to around $100 million a year, approximately, as a headline figure. But also there's variations because some funding comes online at a various time, and this has been the situation now approximately until 2020, and now then the question is how much will that be in the future, and where and how.